listen to me grind. Take down the film watchers and nerds all at once. I am one of those skeptical of status quo.
Hey, welcome back. We're talking about Dyami Brown. Don't know if I'm saying that right. I guarantee I'm not, for a guy who still struggles to say ETN and can really only get the name out if he says the letters. Not because these are difficult names or a human being shouldn't be able to pronounce words. Just I happen to suck at it. I'm sorry, but yeah, I say Dyami Brown. Someone correct me in the comments, I guess. Yo, Dyami Brown is like the deep... No, I can't do the fake stuff, sorry. If that's what you're here for, like an entertaining YouTuber, no. But I can break down the production profile of college players and describe how well it compares to past prospects they've gone on to do well or badly in the NFL. So, like, if you're into that, that's what I'm about to do. Now, Dyami Brown is actually someone that I didn't get asked to look at. Kind of weirdly, actually. I expected his name to come up, especially since we're strolling around the outskirts right now. Everyone's talking about the top ranks and who you really need to have ranked as one, and we're like not doing that. We're built different, is the way I'm thinking of it. We're more interested in prospects that we're going to hear a ton about eventually. All of these prospects are going to get talked to death over the next few months, but we're just strolling around the outskirts, right? And I'm kind of enjoying that, just the lesser talked about so far prospects. Now, Dyami Brown is someone that comes up pretty regularly. Someone will mention, like, hey, guy's pretty good. And that's really is in my little bubble. That's as much as I've seen him mentioned. J. Mike Check from the Open Bar podcast actually asked me to look at him live on stream once, as well as Daz Newsome, comes from the same team, and I gave a brief synopsis of what I saw. And I think I talked about him with Zach Reed on that 3-hour marathon we did on prospects, but I really hadn't dug into him yet. So, who is Dyami Brown? Bottom line, he looks like, I think, he's a deep ball guy, would be the description, a guy getting a lot of yards for a relatively small amount of receptions. Don't have targets for college because they're not publicly tracked, which sucks. But, and he looks to have been very productive with that type of role, and grown into the role like most college players do. And as you can see from the graph on that side, but it's actually this side for me. I'm sorry, it confuses me every time, but this side for you. This is one way of seeing an overview of his profile. It's just using one stat. It's a percentage of yards for his team that he got, and I'm telling you that he had a relatively low reception percentage, but his yards percentage, as you can see, jumps well above the average for good prospects playing at a similar age across all conferences since 2008, in those last 2 years. Now, if you're interested, him being below the line at any point isn't like a red flag, and being above the line isn't necessarily a green flag. What I like to do is dig into the context of how these numbers were created, and try to understand who the player is, where he's playing, and see how that makes me feel. It's all about my fifis, really, to be honest. And the way I feel is that we can't really adjust for role. With public data that I've got in the database, linked below and stuff, Wizards collect it, and I just do the very boring grinding work of trying to maintain it in a presentable way so we all get to play, not just people who can get behind paywalls. And it's all public data thanks to Sports Football Reference, or Pro Football Reference is their main site, but they've got a college site. And again, you can find all those sources in one of the tabs, and in the source tab you can find the Wizards who actually can collect most of it, and I'm just doing the grinding. And so that's me, and I also like to talk about it a little bit, and that's what these videos are. So, one of my fifis on Brown, he looks like a guy who got a lot of yards for a relatively low share of receptions, which to me means he's working far down the field. Now, there's stuff we can take from that he's a deep ball guy, but here's the thing, I don't know, and I don't think it's been conclusively proven, that roles carry over particularly well into the NFL. I know Matt Harmon's done a lot of work in reception perception about where players play and how well they succeed and where they succeed, and it's really interesting data, but there haven't been a lot of proof that, a guy who played predominantly on the right always plays predominantly on the right in the NFL. To some extent, yes, but just for my own allegorical, no, experiential, no. Just from the names I know, right? Golden Tate was primarily an outside receiver in college. In the NFL, he clearly hasn't played his best football there. I mean, he's good on the outside, I'm sure. He's a great player. But he's primarily played a lower A-dot role, is the way I describe it. Whereas in college, he was playing a higher A-dot role. And we also know in the NFL, last year, Robbie Anderson displayed a really good skill set outside the numbers, or whatever tape grinders would call it. And then he goes to Carolina, and he shows this above-average skill set at a much lower A-dot, playing in the middle of the field, and actually in some ways cooking, I guess, DJ Moore for a little while in the season, co-opting exponential amounts of volume for the majority of it, struggling with touchdowns, but had a volume to die for in most situations on a different team. So we know players that display talent at one thing can have talent at another thing, and how well that translates from college to the NFL, at least for me, is an unsolved question. Primarily, I think most players are drafted to do what they did in college. That makes sense to me, and I think that's largely our understanding of it, and I think that's true. But how much and how often, no, I don't think any of that is conclusive. So will Dyami Brown only be an outside guy like we projected or imagined for Henry Ruggs because of his speed and his high touchdown role, but low volume role in college? I don't know, really. I don't know how fast Dyami Brown is. I imagine faster than an average human, but and I don't care for 40 times so much either, because another video, man. Just don't care for him. I don't think it accurately describes how they play. Often we define between play speed and combine speed, and it doesn't have a direct correlative relationship to production in the NFL anyway, so care about your thresholds and decision trees, and beyond that, I don't care. So I don't know if he will do that primarily in the NFL, and I don't really care, because if you're very, very good at something, then you score fantasy points with it, and that's really our thing. And so if he primarily plays on the outside, but, he's the erstwhile exception like a Deshaun Jackson, we need to know about that. T.Y. Hilton is primarily an outside receiver, but he's been great for fantasy, right? So that's cool. I don't really care how. What I care is that I can't really compare his stats and a graph like this very fairly to other players, because I can't adjust for role. Even though he's clearly playing more of an outside, to my mind, role, we don't have a fair way of saying, and he did well for guys who do that. It's just comparing all players to all players, no matter what role they played. So his numbers have that slight squiggliness to them, in that, yes, he's got high yards per reception. In his best year, he's got a high yards per team pass attempt in his best year, especially that 19th season. He's well above the average, both the conference average, the team average, the age average, just all the averages. He looks great, and same in his last year, he's above the average. Overall for his career, however, it looks low. Now, what I suspect is it looks low on average because he's playing this high A-dot role, and so he needs to get the minimal volume he can so he can produce all of his yards on few plays or few catches, few receptions. But it looks high when he gets that volume because he's getting so many yards per reception. In fact, his yards per reception kind of bear this out. He's got an 18.7 yards per reception, which is, really high. But again, yards per reception is not a replacement for A-dot, because you could have yards after catch factoring in on that. The reason I'm saying he's primarily playing on the outside is because of that discrepancy between his yards total and his receptions total. And you can see it a little bit on in his team. Daz Newsome, for example, in their last year in 2020, and everything's got a little squiggly asterisks around the 2020 season, and that's fair, but I don't think so across this particular stat. Both of them were getting about 15% of the team's receptions. Dyami was actually getting 15.4, and Newsome was getting 15.1. It's a relatively similar volume, but on that volume, Dyami Brown produced 30% of the team's yards, Newsome produced 18% of the team's yards. Now, Newsome's is significantly low. Again, if we were to put it on this graph, which I've done, he's below the line, and he's also playing at an older age. But it shows you a relative comparison that Dyami's like doubling the percentage of the team's yards with the same amount of receptions, and that's where I get the inclination and indication that he's getting a lot of yards per reception in a high A dot kind of fashion. It's not so much yards after the catch, but maybe I'm wrong. We'll have to talk to some film grinders who actually watch this stuff play out a little bit more to get an idea of his traits and his role. But I think it pretty clearly shines through because it's kind of a feature of all of his seasons. Now, to talk through his career in general, in his first year, again, he didn't do much. He's got, 4% of the team's receptions, 6% of the team's yards, 7% of the team's touchdowns, but you can't be the best every year, and the reason that age adjustments work and seem to have something to say about the talent level of a player is that when you first step onto a team, you're not expected. Very few have exceptional levels of production because it's the same way rookies don't, right? There's a lot to learn, there are veterans on the team, so on and so forth. Also in college, you've got this discrepancy in that you've just stepped onto a college team from high school. So you're essentially a skinny kid playing against players who have been in a college weight room for 3 years with trainers and scheme books and learning about the offense. So you shouldn't expect too much, to be honest. And that's why I want players who do a lot early in their career. That's a signal that there's something about them, despite being a skinny kid, or maybe they advance to college already pretty ripped, I guess. And so there is some context around age adjustments as well, but essentially I'm saying I don't care about that so much. Playing into his second year, he became the 2 in the offense, if I remember right. The second most fantasy points scored is where I'm measuring that. 11% of the team's receptions, 27% of the team's yards, as you can see on the graph here. About 30% of the team's touchdowns. So that's a relatively good balance between touchdowns and yards. It's not he's scoring everything by touchdowns, but he is clearly scoring a lot of yards per receptions, considering that inconsistency once again. So it's a feature of his profile. Neither Newsome or Brown crested a 30% dominator, so a percentage of the team's receiving game. RotoViz recently, over the last few years, has been pushing a 30% threshold for breakout age. I look at the 20% threshold, which is why he has an age 19 breakout age, because he was over 20% of the team's offense that second year. But he never hit 30%, which is why I think he's going to fall into that good category for statistically, but not great, because people have gotten, I think, and they should, because it's a higher hit rate kind of grouping or bucketing, looking at that 30% rate. Newsome also never hit 30%. Now, the reason I keep mentioning Newsome is, one, it's good to know how the balance of the offense, when you're looking for the context, you're looking to see how he was playing off the other players, specifically at wide receiver, but also the other positions. Newsome was always playing at a slightly older age. He's a year older than Newsome in every career, so his production all looks a little worse. My pre-draft model, for example, weights age twice across 2 different statistics. It looks at their average and based on how they did compared to players at similar ages, and then it looks at their best season. So Dyami Brown, for example, is below average when you look at how he did compared to the average of his stats compared to successful prospects, but in his best year, this age 19 year, it's exceptionally good. And so what it's essentially doing is comparing him to past prospects and then looking for that best year to see if there's any evidence that he can punch through a higher ceiling. Like if you can do exceptional at something that has signal at a younger age, it thinks it's indicative that the player is able to have highlights, able to punch through a difficult level of achievement in some way. I hope I'm explaining that well. I don't know I did, but it thinks his best season indicates that he can. What I'm also saying is there's a slight squiggliness to the nature of it, because we're comparing his production, yards per team pass attempt, dominator rating, and percentage of receiving yards to players who are playing lower A dot roles and higher A dot roles, and he's to me, clearly a higher A dot player. And that's kind of an uneven comparison. So this is definitely good, but you should be aware that's how he created it. And he never used that role to get to 30%. Which again, if we could adjust for role, that might be more typical. When Deshaun Jackson did, for example. But it might be more typical not to be able to use that type of role to get to 30%. And again, that's why the 30% bucket is a higher hit rate. But it also drops out good players. And because T. Higgins, Doug Baldwin, plenty never got to a 30% breakout rate, and then we're good in the NFL, especially playing at lower conferences, to be honest. Despite the typical narrative that lower conference players dominate more readily, it's not always true in specific contexts. So that general understanding, or what seemingly logical idea, doesn't bear out to be true. And again, why it's a good idea to dig into a player's production and see how he compares to his peers and peers from the same conference. Speaking of the same conference, he comes from the ACC Coastal, and yeah, it's a good conference. It's pretty well drafted. I always like looking at the ACC Coastal because Demaryius Thomas's name comes back up if you go down, and it's always fun to look at Demaryius Thomas's production. And for an example, like Dyami Brown scoring an 8, which again I think is a little elevated because of his role, but like I firmly believe it. He's in my now 3rd tier, which is a very promising tier of wide receivers. And again, because of his role, it's not evenly compared. So I have some interest that maybe I'm a little too low on him based on that skill set being valuable in the NFL and relatively few players excelling at it at all, let alone coming from the ACC Coastal with a decent potential for draft capital. Now, recently, they haven't been drafting, but I'll get back to that. Anyway, Demaryius Thomas, like my pre-draft model, he's scoring an 8. Typically, 8's very good. 5 is average, 6 is good. 8s are normally where you start getting a little bit excited, which is where Dyami Brown is. 9s and 10s tend to top the class. Demaryius Thomas scored a 16. Just for one reference point of how productive he was in this particular conference. Like, it's always fun, but that was a while ago. Recently, the NFL's really only spent 15 fifth-round picks. KJ Osborne, again, all these players score lower than Dyami Brown. I think he's probably the next best prospect since. Probably Ricky June, who I never really bought into because of the context of his production. He had a later breakout age, and so I think the model was slightly fooled by a big blow-up season. But he got, He got undrafted, to be fair. So there wasn't much hope for him. Isaiah Ford is probably the last player I was really interested in from the ACC Coastal. He scored about 7.5 in my pre-draft model, and I really wanted that to be a thing. If memory serves, he got 7th rounded, and also I want a 7th round breakout player just because it's basically never happened. And that would be exciting. But he came on and off the practice squad for the Miami Dolphins, if I remember right, and I got excited every time, and so far it hasn't worked out, but I'm still, you got to root for you guys no matter what. And so Isaiah Ford was the last guy I was really interested in. You might more remember Braxton Berrios in 2018. He got 6th round capital. He scored basically nothing in my pre-draft model and I wasn't overly impressed. Ryan Switzer got some buzz not so long ago, again 2017. He had a 6. He was pretty good, but I wasn't overly impressed. At North Carolina, he got 4th round draft capital. Bug Howard was undrafted. Mac Hollins got 4th round draft capital. Again, it takes a while, and in fact, Tyler Boyd, who scores a 10, as if it matters, in my pre-draft model, he got 2nd round draft capital, and that's the last time any significant capital was spent from this conference. But it's very clear the NFL is willing to dip in when there's a particularly productive player from these places, whatever, from the ACC Coastal. And I think Dyami Brown is probably the most productive, even if it's unevenly compared to different players playing different roles, as Tyler Boyd. They don't comp in any way. Tyler Boyd was more productive, and as we know, plays a lower ADOT role in the NFL, and likely did in college as well, based on that balance of reception percentage and yards percentage. That kind of bore out to be true as well. But yeah, I think he's my favorite prospect from this class, not since Isaiah Ford. He was just a deep-hearted love I have from guys who are lesser loved and get less draft capital in the NFL. But really since Tyler Boyd. I don't think he's as good a prospect. It's just highlighting that this guy was the most productive from this area of the wherever it is country. Since Tyler Boyd, and that's positive. I do think he's going to get some buzz. I think he could be the next guy to get 3rd round draft capital from the NFL, but we will know that before we have to draft, so we don't have to stress about it too much. There's a lot of promise there. I think he's very skilled at a skill set that the NFL values. I think there are some minor tints or squiggliness to his production profile, again, never got over 30% dominator, was passing back and forth with Daz Newsome, who's playing at an older age, to be fair, so was bigger earlier, essentially. And I like him a lot more than Daz Newsome just because of that age adjustment, but never really broke through, again, that 30% crest to be, what do you know? The gives you the special feels of an ultra dominant player playing in a decent conference. He never really got there, but that could have been because of the type of role he was playing. And I think, yeah, he was very decent in the role he played. I think, as the graph shows and as all his stats show, in fact, incredibly impressive as a college player, and there was some indication because of the consistency and the progression from year 19 to 20, despite switching back and forth with Daz Newsome, that this is a guy who can definitely succeed in the NFL. So yeah, I like him a little bit more than Amon-Ra St. Brown, because there's a little more indication that he can punch through a higher ceiling. Is the way I'm terming it these days, I guess, or that he stood out a little bit more, and he's coming from a slightly better situation in terms of what the NFL views the area and seems to spend draft capital, and that's Dyami Brown. I think he's very good. I have questions about the role and how valuable or consistent it is, I guess is the term often thrown out for fantasy, but I don't honestly care. If Dyami Brown gets good draft capital, goes to a good landing situation, I'm just going to take all that Sego and take the bet on him if, I'm in that position in my draft with that in mind of whatever team I'm drafting for. And I think you should too. You should pay more attention to Dyami than he's currently getting. Within my small bubble, at least. You might be hearing nothing but Dyami Brown content right now and be like, bruh, come on, man. We talk about him too much, not too little. But if you haven't really taken a look at him through whether your process is yet, I would advise it. It's a fun look through. He is producing so much on so relatively little opportunity that if you like watching tape, I can't imagine that it's not a fun watch. And again, a high percentage of touchdowns, so lots of good plays must be in there somewhere. And whether you're looking through tape or numbers, it's actually a really fun profile to look through. I think he was a pretty impressive player, to be honest, at the college level, playing at a decent college or conference level, even if it is for, checks quickly, North Carolina. Who's the last guy from North Carolina that was of interest? Ryan Switzer was actually playing at North Carolina, and I think he was more productive, playing a more dynamic role than Switzer did. Hakeem Nicks is actually the last guy that came from North Carolina with any significant draft capital and NFL success. He got first round picked. So, it's possible, but that was back in 2009. So, we also got Michael Carter, who's an interesting profile. I do want to look into him a little bit more. Because again, I'm hearing some positive buzz, but he isn't properly talked about. So again, this seems to be a division. It seems to be somewhat of a congested situation. Daz Newsome, I'm not so interested because of the age adjustment, but him and plus Michael Carter, I've heard some good things. He clearly wasn't dominating at this higher 8-8 role with lots of yards per reception because there wasn't other talent or anything. I think college level wise, it was a decent offense with other players who could suck up their own opportunity. And I think that's in his favor as well. But anyway, dig in. Let me know what you think. Let me know if I missed anything or if my analysis is boring and dry and stupid. Because, yeah, I get it. It is. I know. It's alright. I enjoy it. I'm having fun. How about you? No? Okay. Yeah, I'm getting out of here. Thanks. Take a look at Dyami Brown. He's definitely worth a look. And it's a fun profile to look at. I recommend it. I recommend Dyami Brown, I guess. Thanks again for checking it out. And I'll see you next time. Hope you're happy, healthy, safe, and keep grinding. You see, I'm almost like a professional. Like, that sounded like a real outro, right? I'm almost there. Really. Okay, bye. Thanks.
Do you have the time to listen to me grind?